He's fantastic. The last time I was on this stage, a few weeks later, we had a pandemic lockdown. So I hope, I mean, let's see where, look, I changed the title because the original one is Facts Matter, Hold the Line. But given where we are today and where America is today, and you know where America goes, the world follows, I think this is what we need. Hope comes from action, right? Hope in action. And David I got the minutes. All right, so I have a time. Thank you for spending your evening. I will depress you a little bit at the beginning, but there is hope in the end, I promise. Why should you care about the Philippines? Here's in a nutshell what we are. 14,000 islands in the tropics, so this is very cold for me. But it is a country that, in a nutshell, we spent 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. 300 years under Spanish colonial rule and then 50 years under American rule. Our Constitution is based on the United States, almost a copy of it. We have a Bill of Rights. We have 3 branches of government. And we also were the petri dish for the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right? So Americans were the target, but I spoke with Christopher Wiley, and he said that they tested tactics of mass manipulation in my country, and if it worked, they tried it on you, right? So this is what we have in common. This is why our experience, actually, I think will be really interesting for you. This book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, came out in November 2022, a week before ChatGPT. And I say that because the core question for Filipinos, which is first what I wrote this for, but it is a question for you today, is that, what will you sacrifice for the truth? And I'll show you some of the data we lived through. The first who come under attack in this are truth tellers, right? So journalism. If you distrust journalists, it's partly because we've been under attack since at least 2014, like extreme attack, information operations attack. And we're in an incentive structure where it rewards the crappiest journalism. I'll show you this. Let me keep going. So what will you sacrifice for the truth? That's what I would love you to walk out of here with, because in the Philippines, today, so Rodrigo Duterte took office in 2016. It was when the political dominoes began to fall globally. That was May 2016. About a month later, it was Brexit. And then all the elections that year, November, was President Trump's first term in office. And what we saw then was the impact of social media. I'll go through that. More than 20 translations of this book now, and part of what's been interesting for me is the way cultures take it. The French were the most aggressive. Instead of How to Stand Up to a Dictator, resist the dictator. The Japanese were the most passive. It didn't even have dictator in the title. It's about social media. But in English, they had it, right? And then in South Korea, which, of course, there was just a 24-hour martial law declared. This also was published in South Korea. And in Mandarin. What was interesting in this book in Georgia was the book that was held up. So I guess I was in Georgia last year for the launch. And Georgians, like Ukrainians have had to literally fight for their democracy. Georgians are on their 87th straight day of protests for electoral integrity, right? They claim that their elections were stolen by the Kremlin, and they're demanding. This is not the first one, but the reason I'm showing you this is the first journalist who was jailed, when she was being sentenced, she held up my book, and I guess 87 days of protest, right? You look for it. You look for what you're going to do next. And it's about to be published in April in Mongolia, which is between China and Russia. I used to think that was bad, but then, the last week in America has really shifted the entire world. So, yeah. Why is all this important? Well, I'll summarize it for you in just three points, right? And why I wanted to come back to Maine, to Camden, to this wonderful, it's like large enough but intimate enough, right? And you have this community which is the core of everything. I think the three things is this, we now live in a world where technology has reached the cellular level of a democracy. The Gen Zs, each one of us on social media, we have been insidiously manipulated. A 2018 MIT study said that lies spread 6 times faster than facts. And that was before Elon Musk bought Twitter and spread lies faster, right? So now it becomes, because that leads directly to hacking our biology, right? Thinking fast, thinking slow. 95% of how you make decisions in your life, this is Daniel Kahneman, echoed by the AI advisor of Pope Francis at the Vatican. He said 95% of how we make decisions in our world, in our lives today is based on how you feel. So technology hacked our biology. Again, remember, lies spread 6 times faster. If you add fear, anger, and hate, if you incite violence, it spreads virally. Right? So why is that important? Because without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we have no shared reality. We can't have journalism. We can't solve any existential problems, much less climate change. We can't have democracy. Democracy rests on trust, right? So we go back, the 3 points. Person-to-person defense of our democracy. Every person in this room today, every person watching, don't ask or wait for someone else to tell you what to do. Call your community together. Draw the line of your values where on this side you're good, on this side you're evil, and don't cross it. Then hold the line. That was our rallying cry in the Philippines. Hold the line. Don't voluntarily give up your rights. For doing that in the Philippines, I was threatened with almost a century cumulatively, 103 years in jail, 10 criminal charges in a little over a year or so. Well, 8 years later, those 10 criminal charges are down to 2. Now I can only go to jail for like 7 years, but I lose some freedom, but I am significantly better. And Rappler itself has survived, while the largest broadcaster in the Philippines, which didn't hold the line, lost its license to operate. We call it a franchise. All right, so because what is happening is the second point, death by 1,000 cuts, right? What does that mean? It means that when the AP is pushed to call it the Gulf of America, so tiny, why not just do it, right? Death by 1,000 cuts, but each cut you bleed, and the body politic can bleed to death. Right? So death by 1,000 cuts. And that 1,000 cuts is not from Taylor Swift. It came from Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden used that in the 9/11 attacks, right? That's how he was going to get America, death by 1,000 cuts. And then finally, how do we get there? In the person-to-person defense of our democracy, every single one of us, fear works. It does. We all know that. But I think the best way, and this was something I learned as an immigrant walking into a public school in Toms River, New Jersey when I was 10 years old, I could barely speak the language. I had no cultural context, and I was afraid. But what you need to do when you're tested is to not get in your own way, right? Don't stop yourself from succeeding. So you touch, you hold, you embrace your fear. And what we did in Rappler is we workflowed the worst case scenarios. And that is shutdown, that is violence. And then on the shutdown, we drilled it every quarter. Because once you get through the worst case, everything is cake. And you keep going, right? So embrace your fear, because this was for the Philippines when I did this slide many, many years ago. Now for you in the audience, your courage will determine the fate of humanity, because where America goes, we tend to follow. I've given up on big tech, and the reason why I'm showing this to you is because 3 years ago, we began to build deliberative public technology, deliberative technology. We have no public tech stack. We mentioned a library in the real world where anyone, rich or poor, can go read a book. We don't have a tech stack where we are not insidiously manipulated, right? So we began to build it, and we rolled it out a year ago in time for our elections, May this year. But let me show you why that becomes important and why Americans should demand better from tech. Because for me, everything, the core problem is technology, right? And you may not know this, but this is the data. This is what the data shows. Big data, the change of scale led to a change of state. That essentially, having a fire hose of data come at you, having massive quantities of data changed everything. It was a massive transformation. And I became a journalist because information is power. But what happens when that power is taken by big tech? Right? When I became a journalist in 1986, it is my 39th year as a journalist, distribution and creation of journalists was the same. But around 2014, the creation of journalism still rested with news organizations, but distribution was taken over by big tech. And the crazy part here is that neither the AI of social media and machine learning, not that AI the first time, or generative AI, which rolled out in November 2022, neither of those are based on facts. This is why it was so easy. So how does social media work, right? Does anyone here not have a cell phone? So if you have a Facebook account, and the reason why the Philippines, again, is for 6 years in a row, Filipinos spent the most time on social media globally. That was until 2021, right? And what that meant is that everyone who has an account on Facebook, for example, that there's Consumer Reports said more than 2,300 massive data sets for every single person, for every single account. And what happens is machine learning builds a model of you that knows you better than you know yourself. Why? Because it also has predictive analytics, right? Get rid of the word model. The flattening of meaning is really hard when you use these tech words. Change the word model with clone. Did you agree to be cloned online? Right? None of us did. And then what happened was AI. AI, by the way, has been around for more than 70 years. AI comes in, takes all of our clones, puts that becomes the massive database for micro-targeting. Micro-targeting is not the old advertising of media. Micro-targeting is taking your weakest moment to a message and selling it to a company or country, right? So that's the insidious manipulation. It's surveillance capitalism for profit. Surveillance capitalism. We didn't even have a name for it until Shoshana Zuboff published a book called Surveillance Capitalism in 2019. So 2019. So that's social media, machine learning, and AI. What has it done? It's mildly addictive, right? We know this, and the design is much like a casino. There's the opportunity for a win, unpredictable rewards, and then you keep doing it again. And what has that done? You have increased levels of dopamine. It's kind of mildly addictive, but it has led to this: information warfare, from the personal to the sociological, so the person to the group to emergent human behavior. We are shifted by this, and again, something really simple. You have a cell phone in your pocket, you're having an intimate discussion with someone, and it keeps buzzing because you have it on silent. So you take it out, you're in the middle of this really, intimate conversation. You look at it. Study says that you will take 20 minutes to get back to that level of intimacy in your conversation. Literally, the plasticity of our brains are shifted. It's like you have a neuron, it's supposed to go straight, right? But then these interruptions forces that neuron to turn right. You do it often enough, it keeps turning right. So there is a shift in emergent human behavior, right? Sorry, that's because I worry about what we will become as a species. But sociologically, from the 1960s, the Asch studies, the conformity studies, in groups, the group's behavior affects the individuals. This is where I was doing the counterterrorism, the reports for terrorism for CNN soon after 9/11. And what I saw in terms of radicalization of the Indonesian suicide bombers, this radicalization now has been released into the public. This is the political gladiators' battle to the death, right? The radicalization that happens. All right, sorry, not to be so bleak. What's the effect on us? You saw this for the first time. Finally, it was really late. Vivek Murthy last year, 2023. 2023, he wrote about the shortened attention spans for teenagers, sleeplessness, increased levels of suicide for young girls, eating disorders, so much more that was there. But then the second paper that he wrote was partly pandemic-driven, the epidemic of loneliness, right? And then that led to the very last paper that he released just before the change in administration. How do you solve the epidemic of loneliness? Community. That's how you do it. But what are the other things that have happened? Those algorithms that insidiously manipulate us. Let me just talk about one thing, because you hear about filter bubbles, you hear about, this kind of division. Here's the way it happened in the Philippines, and we have the data to prove it. In 2016, when Rodrigo Duterte was elected, no one debated the facts. We all were in the center. We agreed. We're in Camden, Maine, right? But if you were pro-Duterte, you moved further right through the Friends of Friends algorithm. Every social media platform used this because they A/B tested it on us. And they found that you are more prone to grow your network if you're fed the Friends of Friends algorithm. So you click Friends of Friends. If you're pro-Duterte, you move further right. If you're anti-Duterte, you move further left. Now imagine years of that, and you have 2025, a fissure, a chasm, and then you replace Duterte with Orban, with Bolsonaro, with Trump, right? And you can see how we've been separated. What's the impact on this? Massive. It's transformative. The first is electoral integrity. The question of whether or not that insidious manipulation online has taken away our individual choice, right? And I would say that's been a question. We've had the data for it. The United States released that in the Senate Intelligence hearing in 2018, December of 2018. But nothing has really been done. It's happened with impunity until And here's the most interesting part. December of 2024, Romania decides to void their elections because they had a runoff election where the third candidate, who doesn't have a political party and only campaigned on TikTok, won. And what they did is they released the intelligence report that showed Kremlin interference, and they voided the elections. The question I have is, we've had all this data. What would have happened if the UK did that with Brexit? Or the US with the 2016 elections? Just interesting. The second is more important in a weird way. I mean, elections are transformative, right? And you want agency. That's the question of the first, electoral integrity. But the second one is something we are living through. Online violence is real-world violence. And I've grown through that over the years because I started with, online violence leads to real-world violence. But what we have lived through, and you've seen this, and I've actually pulled them out more in America than anywhere else, is how the people who carried out shootings, Buffalo shooter from 2022, he published a 150-page manifesto, radicalized online, and he was fed that violence. He lived in a public, it's actually the sewage of our public information ecosystem. And he shot people, killed people in Buffalo, right? So online violence leads to real-world violence. Across the world, in every country, there are two major fracture lines that are always split open. The first is gender, the second is race. There's more on that. All right, I have 13 minutes. Let me just quickly go through this, and then I'm looking forward to speaking with David. This is from 2012. This is a slide from Rappler in 2012 when I drank the Kool-Aid. I believed in the power of social media. I just never thought that information operations could do what it did. But we thought this. We were hoping to use it for good, right? Whatever that post is carries an emotion that travels over social networks that changes behavior. Framingham Heart Study. 3 generations, study that showed that there are 3 degrees, that every emotion that ripples through us as people, has 3 degrees. Meaning, even an emotion like loneliness, if I'm feeling lonely, my friend has a 54% chance of feeling lonely because I do. My friend's friend has a 25% chance of feeling lonely because I do. My friend's friend's friend, the third, 15% chance. Anger spreads much faster, but behavior spreads this way, right? Online, it's on steroids. So that's why it's so important. If you're interested in that, Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler did the studies. It's a book called Connected, published almost a decade ago. This is how we discovered this in the Philippines and why I was attacked and why my company was attacked by the Philippine government. In 2016, we began to see what was happening on Facebook. Propaganda War. This is the internet series. I wrote 2 of the 3-part series. The 3rd part was written by my co-founder. Let me show you some of what we found. This was the first President Duterte had just taken office. There was a bombing in his hometown. And this was the headline on a Saturday. I was at the beach, right? And then what happened? A 6-month-old article zoomed to the top of Rappler. I could see the data. And what happened was the propaganda networks that were pro-Duterte took a 6-month-old article of Rappler and began reposting and spreading it. The impression it gave was that the government had already solved the problem. Impression, right? It's not true, but it spread like this, right? They used the Duterte News Global, and the only reason we found it was, my theory is this was probably a journalist because they linked back to Rappler. So we did a story on it, and this is part of what we saw. That happened on a weekend. By the Monday, the palace was I was told the palace was in emergency meetings. Here's the one that I like the best. How far does a lie spread? How many accounts can you actually touch? Well, this one, we began looking at the Facebook accounts that were attacking journalists. Luvimin Kancho is a Facebook page. We began to see really weird behavior. It was only posting in groups. So we began to put in an Excel sheet the groups that this account was posting in, and we took the photo. When you dig a little bit deeper, you realize that this is not the photo of Luvimin Kancho. It's a kind of second-tier Korean pop star. And then we began to look at Luvimin Kancho's friends, and we found 26 accounts that shared each other all the time. This was early. This was 2016. And then we took everything that they wrote about themselves on their Facebook page and had fact-checked every single one. On these 26 accounts, every single thing they said was false, a lie. But we went one step further. We took 3 months then to begin to count how many other accounts did they influence, did they touch, right? Where were they posting? More than 3 million others. 26 fake accounts, 3 million to 3 million spread. That's when I began to think Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, right? And we published this story in 2016. 8 minutes, I'm gonna do this fast. So we created this for our social media team. We took the data. This was an easier time. How can our social media team work if they don't know if it's real or not? If it is posted more than 10 times or reposted more than 10 times, it turns red, right? Look at October 2016, which was when we came under attack. It's almost a sea of red. I want you to look at the account of Sally Matay, and you will see the behavior. It's called astroturfing, right? Fake. It's not fake grass, but you can see it's just a cut and paste in every single Facebook page. This is how they seed the meta-narrative that you begin to believe. This is the network that did that. And it was the same network that attacked journalists. This is the first of 10 waves in the first 6 years, right? It's 2025 now. But it was so specific and strategic that it was broken down by demographic. When I came under attack, these were the kinds of things, then it became mimetic. They began to spread memes because we started working with Facebook. Facebook, at a certain point, was trying to do something. I won't tell you when they stopped, but I had things like this, how I looked, how I sounded. I'm not corrupt, so they couldn't accuse me of corruption. I suppose they could have, but I've spent a long time as a reporter, as a bureau chief in Jakarta and Manila for CNN. I have dry skin, eczema, so that was the closest they could get, but then they began calling me scrotum face. It was dehumanization, right? The goal is to dehumanize you, to dox you so that you voluntarily give up. They're very creative, like this is every time there's an award or we did an investigative series. This is a PBS series, 1,000 Cuts about Rappler. My skin is a little bit better than that, but look at how creative they are. You do have to laugh, right? It took me a little while to be able to show it to you. All right, so look, there's a lot of stuff, and I only have 6 minutes because I do want to go back and forth with David. But look, this mirrors what's happening in many other countries, and from what we saw last year leading up to elections here in the US, very similar. The ProFact, so these were news organizations. The sizes of the circles are eigenvector centrality. We're using social network analysis because I want to track how information spreads. information in quotes, right? And you can see that the facts are much smaller inside this larger kind of circle of pro-Duterte, pro-Marcos communities. The only time, actually the first time that it almost became even was the day I got arrested. And, you know, of course, my sales team then said, Maria, every time you get arrested, we get a spike of contributions. And I keep telling my sales team that's not a sustainable business model. But you can see the different realities forming, right? So let me go through. We're not alone. This is a 2022 UNESCO report, Online Violence Against Women Journalists. Look at some of the stats. 73% of women journalists surveyed by the International Center for Journalists experienced online abuse. 73%. Of that, 25% received threats of physical violence, and 20% had been attacked or abused in the real world. The fear is real, but I say this all the time, that we do need to stand up. I gotta tell you, it took me maybe a year before I could show that photo. It's kind of yucky, right? I mean, but you gotta. All right, I'm running out of time. I gotta show this one to you. Generative AI, it's gonna get worse, right? We tracked the first generative AI that used me. We tracked it to a Russian scam network, and I'm still looking at this. But let me show you what that looks like. Let's pull up the audio.
Today, I want to share one of my big secrets. What helped me to become a successful person is to quickly jump into new opportunities without any hesitation. And right now, my #1 source of income is a new automated cryptocurrency trading program. This is the biggest opportunity I've seen.
I don't sell cryptocurrency. But the funny thing was that, you know, CEOs of companies then started calling me saying, what's that crypto you're selling? I was like, no, that's not me. So here's the other part. As Americans went to vote, as we went into the year of almost 80 elections in 2024, in January 2023, Facebook decides to choke traffic to news sites, a drop of anywhere from 50 to 83%. David, I'm sure you've seen this. And then in 2023, Google began this search generative experience in 125 countries. They rolled it out in October, right before the US elections. What is that? That means that you now, when you get the answer, you don't have to go to the news site anymore. That means we get less traffic, right? So what does that mean? There's a drop in traffic, a drop in revenue. News organizations are firing people because we can't afford it. The business model is dead. And finally, that third one, the enshittification of the internet. Literally, that is what you're getting. Cory Doctorow coined the term, there was a point in time last year when Shrimp Jesus was trending on Facebook. AI generated. All right, I'm running out of time. I want to quickly show you this echoing of disinformation. We elected a second Marcos. In 1986, the Philippines had a people power revolt where Ferdinand Marcos, who had been in power for almost 21 years, was kicked out for kleptocracy, stealing $10 billion. Well, we elected his only son and namesake in 2022. But look, how did they explain the wealth? They found Marcos gold. That's how they explained the wealth. And this is 2013. You can see the orange is fact-checking and news. The green is the disinformation, right? Literally how you change history in front of your eyes. How Marcos, the name, went from the kleptocrat to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. It happened here, right? 2014. Look at the disinformation in 2015. In 2016, he ran for vice president and lost by 200,000 votes. Look at it keep going in 2017, 2018, 2019. We journalists were just clueless over here, right? And then look at what the pandemic did. 2020, that was really And then in 2021, we began to organize ourselves in fact-checking. But it wasn't enough. He was elected in 2022. That's disinformation. This is from the U.S. Electoral Integrity Partnership. This is Stop the Steal, the electoral fraud. The narrative was introduced a year earlier on August 2019 on RT, Russia Today, right? And then came up, the earliest domestic piece was December 22, 2019. Steve Bannon on August 11th, 2020 began the mainstreaming. And then Tucker Carlson took it over here September 15th. Then the super spreaders and normalization happened in October 2020. October 7th, the Q drop. This is Electoral Integrity Partnership, which helped the 2020 elections maintain facts. But what happened in 2023? Those researchers were targeted with lawsuits. You're following the Philippines, guys. So here's the question. I'm finishing, David, promise. How do you rebuild trust? We had 3. This was my elevator pitch for Rappler in 2012 was we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism. We had 3 pillars: technology, journalism, and community. We journalists forget that all the time. This worked in protecting the facts, right? We built the Facts First PH pyramid in 2022. Actually, we should have started it in 2021, but that Nobel got in the way, that thing. So we were delayed, but look, we organized 16 news organizations to do fact-checking. Facts don't spread. So the second layer, the mesh, is the distribution layer. If you were part of a group of the 116 groups, you would get a message from us that said, here are the 5 fact checks. You have to share one, share it with emotion. And you cannot use anger. And every week we tested, we mapped the landscape. And what we found was inspiration spreads as fast as anger. Interesting, right? And then we gave all that data. So we did this with Google News Initiative and Midan, which gave us the data pipeline. We did a data privacy agreement. So by the time it got here, news organizations were so weakened that we asked academics to come in, universities to come in, and they would do a weekly press conference to tell us, here's the disinformation this week, this is who's being targeted, this is who's benefiting. And then finally, 6 law firms, left, right, and center, and we really needed them because as soon as we rolled out the Facts First pyramid, the Solicitor General, our own Solicitor General, then filed a case against me and Rappler in the Supreme Court, saying that fact-checking is prior restraint. Yeah, you get it. But look what we found. 4 different communities, right? So it goes back to communities. People who follow news tend to cluster together. The artists tend to cluster together. Activists cluster together. And faith groups clustered together. This was around the time when I really began. I'm a wayward Catholic, but I really began working with our church groups and the Vatican. And I began to have more faith in humanity. But let me end with this, right? This is the moment we took over the center of the Facebook information ecosystem with facts. Because remember, right, the end goal of disinformation is not to make you believe one thing. It's to make you distrust everything. Because the only government that can function when there is no trust is a dictatorship, right? Democracy is built on trust. Let me leave it with this. Dmitry Muratov and I rolled this out in April 2022. More than 300 Nobel laureate civil society groups. This was largely focused on Europe because they were working on the Digital Services Act. Reclaim our rights. The first, stop surveillance for profit, right? This is not a freedom of speech issue, it is a safety issue. It's like putting lead in your paint. Stop surveillance for profit. We have human rights in the physical world, we have human rights in the virtual world. 2, stop coded bias. Because if you are marginalized in the real world, if you are a woman, LGBTQ+, if you are from an ethnic minority, you are further marginalized online. The Cambridge Analytica whistleblower said, digital colonialism didn't die, it only moved online. And then finally, the last one, journalism as an antidote to tyranny. The reason I end with that last line, that your courage determines the fate of humanity, is that 2025 may be the year that journalism dies. I see the same things happening here that I lived through in the Philippines. And your courage determines the fate of humanity. Thank you.
Maria Ressa, thank you. I'm going to pick up, and then we're going to have to go back a little bit because I want to understand something better. But I want to pick up on something that I could see resonated with the group, which was ways forward. Separate from the politics of the moment and the White House of the moment, do you see any potential for a coalition on the left and a coalition on the right about limiting tech company power and intrusions into privacy and surveillance, what you talked about? Because it's not necessarily a lefty issue.
No.
I talk to conservatives who are worried about some of the same things.
Yeah.
Can you build on that is the question.
There was the KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, was bipartisan, thought that it would pass last year, and it didn't pass by just a small margin. Yes, there has to be. This is a safety issue, right? So, having said that, the broligarchy is in power, right? Think about it. Just think about it. When everything is about power and money, then the design of the platform is secondary. It is about keeping you scrolling, even if you're Gen Z and it's hard to necessarily find meaning on this, right? So it should be all of our concerns, and it is a global concern. And I have to say, the tech lobby, 3 years ago in the United States, it was about $70 million. In the EU, at the time that they were debating the Digital Services Act, it was 125 million euros. It's a bigger lobby now than fossil fuel, than tobacco. It's the largest lobby. What does that mean? One of the things that they've said, there are two things that stick out that is a pet peeve. The first is that they basically say that it's about misinformation. Whenever you say, we use misinformation, media in the United States uses misinformation. We in the Philippines use disinformation. Because it's not about the kind of, it's not about a mistake you make when you share something. It's about the intent to manipulate you, the disinformation itself. And then, I'm sorry, the most important one, of course, is that this is a free speech issue, that you shouldn't regulate tech companies. It's the least regulated industry globally. And, the door of a plane fell off. Do you remember that one?
I remember.
And a CEO resigned. There were repercussions for it. Myanmar in 2018 had genocide happen, and both the UN and Meta sent groups to Myanmar, and they came back with the same conclusion, that Facebook played a role, enabled it. Yet nothing was done. No one has paid any price. Right? So impunity needs to stop. Sorry, what a long answer to your question. Look.
The answers can be long, just the questions.
I know that we need to get there, because we cannot get our agency back if we're addicted and if we're being manipulated. Let me just end with this quote by Yuri Andropov, who's the former KGB chair. He is former Secretary General of is that what he's called, of the Soviet Union. He said, disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become an addict, a changed person. We are all addicts. And we now have to wean ourselves off of that. And the only way that will happen is if regulations are in place.
You gave the example here, but ended the story a little early. This is when the internet lifted up an old story that Rappler had published and used it in a different context after an atrocity. And you studied it, you traced it, and leading up to that, it's my understanding that you had a pretty good relationship with Facebook. You used to meet with its founder sometimes. You've met the guy. What did they do? What did Facebook do when you said, our work is being misrepresented? What was the outcome of you calling this to their attention?
At the beginning, there was silence, right? Because they did this on purpose. It's very proxy. Let me put it this way. At the beginning, the people you're talking to are salespeople. They're not the product managers or engineers. The engineers are the ones building this, and their incentive is to keep you scrolling, because that makes the most money. So then I went to them with that stuff, right? The scrotum face. It took a long time to get that off Facebook, because you know that one with the earring, that's a human organ. It's funny when you see it because it's much easier. That had a Facebook page, Vove PH. They literally spread it on Facebook. They said, when I brought that to them, I was like, this is not normal. I'm a journalist. I'm protected in a Bill of Rights. And they were like, no, Maria, you're a public figure. It's actually illegal, some of this stuff, right? And here's the other part. Like, people forget that frequency. You say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact. You pound someone 1,000,000 times, and it has a psychological effect. And that's the frequency that's there. So no, yes, we were very good friends. I guess we're frenemies now, because Rappler is still a fact-checking partner
You
of
tell a story
Facebook.
where they even take your correction down.
Yes, that's true.
That happened.
Yes, you read my book. Yeah. They took the correction of what they had done, and it was taken down, right? You feel utterly helpless, and I think what I'm just saying is, do not fall into learned helplessness. Because we just bombarded them with data, and there was a period of time where I'm covered by several NDAs. Let me just figure out whether I can talk to me in person later.
All right, fair enough. We want your questions, and so I'm about to go to the audience after one more of mine. You talked about, part 4 was journalism as an antidote to tyranny. I'm a reporter. I love hearing that. But aren't you really talking about something larger than journalism? You're talking about a fact-based world, maybe an antidote to the distortions you're talking about in the political process.
But I push back even more. I had a 26-year-old reporter who Duterte, our president then, literally stood over her and tried to bully her away from the mic. And my reporter, I love her. Her name is Pia Renada, and she just, kept asking him in a respectful manner. He took the mic away from her. But no, journalists have a set of standards and ethics. We did in the old contract we had with the public. We work for the public. We do not work for government, and we used to use the access we had to people in power for the public. That is the standards and ethics. Why would a reporter ask the tough question from the man who has, why does it always be men? But okay, I'm thinking Duterte, and why would the reporter ask a tough question that will anger that powerful person? Because we're journalists. Please don't call us influencers, no offense to influencers, or content creators. Journalism has a set of standards and ethics, and our job is to hold power to account. I hope we survive.
I guess what I'm getting at, because that was a really fascinating answer, and I'm glad you answered it that way. But I'm also asking, isn't there a larger coalition than even journalism when you add peer-reviewed research, science, that kind of stuff? In other words, the same forces that you see as debasing journalism are debasing other people working in the fact-based world.
Yeah, absolutely. We have no information integrity, right? 2 years ago, in 2023, there was a global declaration on information integrity. But signing these papers don't mean anything. 38 countries signed that. There are 52 countries that have signed that now. I'm trying to remember if the United States signed it. But I will say Brazil, right? Brazil and France have been the most, have punched back to tech companies. But it will be interesting to see what happens now. Brazil last year was the head of the G20, and it put information integrity on the G20 agenda. Because if you do not have integrity of facts, how do you have not just integrity of elections, but rule of law, right?
Over the years, I've even seen that the idea of a fact is attacked not just on the right, but also on the left, that it's all subjective, it's all point of view, it's about the privilege of the person sharing the fact. My view has often been, was a person in the room or not? What did money change hands? How much was it? But I think that even society, even before these latest pressures, do you think it's lost sight of what a fact is?
Yes. We are in Camden, Maine. No matter how many times someone pounds, if someone pounds 1,000,000 times, we are in Manila, Philippines. Some people online may actually believe that, right? They will if they've seen it 1,000,000 times. But we are in Camden, Maine, right? That's a fact. That's not debatable. So this is part of the problem. Sorry, to go back to your other question about scientists, and these disinformation networks are not just political. The Marcos Duterte networks also spread the anti-measles. This is before COVID. It was an anti-measles vaccine. And there were several states in the United States that had that same anti-vax message. We had measles outbreak that was triple the number that we normally had in 2018. This is before COVID, as did these conservative states in the United States, right? These networks are for sale. So the new IRA or GRU, right, the Internet Research Agency, there's now a cottage industry in the Philippines, in India, where people for money will drill 1,000,000 times, will get paid to tell you lies that become facts with repetition. So yes, information integrity is a whole of society need, because our scientists also are attacked, right? We're seeing this already just from COVID. But beyond that, move away from politics, go to scientific facts. And you'll see that several researchers have also been attacked in the same way that journalists and activists have been attacked.
The system that you describe here of identifying online falsehoods, fact-checking, exposing, myth-busting, I would call it, and then putting it through the mesh and using, what did you say, inspiration, not anger?
Emotions. This is what I mean. Unless we can design it ourselves, which is where we headed we did a Matrix Protocol chat app. That's where our community is now. But if we only have this, the social media platforms, the way distribution, the public tech stack works, then we have to look at what can work there. And that is emotions. And yes, inspiration spreads as fast as anger. It's just significantly harder to do.
Are you aware of efforts in the U.S. to participate in a scheme like this?
You know, for the last elections, we couldn't get the news organizations and the fact checkers to work together on a broad scale. And civil society is a whole other thing. I mean, we're looking, where is civil society nowadays? You have to redefine civic engagement in the age of exponential lies. We can't function as journalists now without civil society, without the academe. That's why the 4-layer pyramid was there.
The mesh requires some trust among people.
It does.
And
But we did it publicly. That was the other thing. It's funny, someone in the US, when we were talking about this in preparation for the 2024 elections, someone was asking, shouldn't you just do that like clandestinely? Journalists don't really do things clandestinely unless your
do what
sources, like
clandestinely?
the mesh layer
Oh, okay.
of distribution, because it's like a terrorist threat, right? There's always the balance. Governments will say, I don't want to tell you about the threat because I want to actually keep it a secret so I can fix it. But the public needs to know the threat so they can also protect themselves. This is the same argument as this. I believe you need to do it eyes wide open, right? Transparency. And frankly, as journalists today, with generative AI, with all of it, we use this stuff and we are just transparent because you can hold us accountable.
We have some volunteers here in the hall, and we'll get some of the questions from the other locations. You got a question of a Nobel Peace Prize winner? There's some hands, runners go, and I'll pick a number. What's your number there, volunteer? A numero uno. Tell us your name, your town, your first name even.
Wow, that was fast. Greg Suche from St. George, just down the road here. My question, you've said that change comes from information, but if lies spread 6 times more quickly than facts, how does that change occur? Do we try and simply spread 6 times more facts than the lies across the platforms? Or how can we use the existing technology that we have for good?
No. I forgot to tell you the macro impact of that was 2018, right? When lies spread 6 times faster. I think it's significantly worse today. But yeah, I know. But what happened was, as of last year, 71% of the world is now under autocratic rule. We people in a democracy are literally electing illiberal leaders democratically, right? So that's what's happened with the insidious manipulation. How do we fix it? My gosh, please demand better from both the tech companies and from our governments that should be protecting us from this. It's really, I think the rest of the world that understands, that has lived through some of this stuff, we're horrified by the oligarchies, right? And that is dangerous. And that's part of the reason why we need to somehow disengage from it. Here's the last part that there's so much that I wanted to say in this, but understand that it is your your tax-paying dollars. DARPA developed the internet. All of this was given
That's
to
the Defense Department.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, but this was developed and handed to private companies that have now used it to make hundreds of billions of dollars a year at our expense. I didn't really give you an answer for what we can do. Here's what we can do, right? It's gotten worse than when we did this, but you can organize. Oh, so the hold the line, don't give up your rights. And the second one is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. How many people are in this hall? How many people are watching? If every person, when you're online, it spreads 4 times faster. You're times 4, right? What can you do? How can you organize yourself? Don't just think in the physical world, think in the virtual world.
Yeah, and you're not making, are you making a partisan statement? You're advocating
Not
for
at all.
one party or another?
No.
So you're talking about organizing in the interests of what actually is happening and what facts.
Yeah,
Okay.
because we need facts. Look, in the Philippines, we have an average of 20 typhoons every year. And if the typhoon is coming and people don't get the right information, it is life or death. You're getting this now. Hello, America. LA fires, right? We will get extreme weather. So we need information integrity.
There was a question here. Volunteer number 2 is pointing somewhere. Tell us your name, your first name at least, and your town.
Hi, I'm Catherine, and I live here in Camden. And I'm on the horns of a dilemma, and the question that I have for you is, do I cancel my subscription to my favorite newspaper as a protest, or do I continue subscribing to it, mindful of the ways in which information can be manipulated in the coverage. I'm really struggling with this.
Just tell me about the premise to the question. Are you saying that what you're seeing in the paper
No,
looks
what
like misinformation?
No, of course not. I mean, it's all, there's always bias. But,
Oh, let me throw facts at you then.
oh, great.
Right?
Thank you.
The Washington Post actually took out an editorial that was supposed to endorse Kamala Harris. There was an artist who resigned. Several of the news organizations have gone through this. We lived through this in the Philippines. And I hope that talking to news organizations, right, there is this time where you begin to think, can I just duck, right? Can we just duck and then maybe keep our businesses going? Because those things are real, right? Our business took a massive shock when the government tried to shut us down the first time. Within 4 months, we dropped 49% of our advertising revenue. We barely survived, but our community came in to help us survive, right? So I can understand exactly why some of these decisions are made. But the news people in those organizations, this is a debate that is happening now inside the news groups. And I actually think you saw some shifts happen after the Munich Security Conference and after President Trump said Ukraine began the war. So this is a battle internally. I'm not answering your question yet. Let me just do one last thing. I'm still an old-style journalist. Old style in the sense that I grew up in corporate media, really, until I started Rappler. And if President Duterte had not attacked my news organization directly or me personally, maybe I would have ducked. There's a transition that is happening now in America. And I think your question is completely valid. And I can't tell you either way. I've done both. But you should make your voice heard. You should let them know. And then I think the other part is one person. So here's this phrase. In Indonesia and Japan, there's a phrase. The nail that stands up gets the hammer.
Yeah.
But if 1,000 nails stand up and only one hammer is there, it's going to be really hard. So somehow, maybe you can coordinate with your family and friends and see what you can do together. When I mean organize, I'm not talking right, left, whatever. It's like we need facts. Let's get to the facts. I want information integrity.
So you're saying that when you're noticing a newspaper starting to duck and play it safe, that you're inclined, you're wrestling with yourself about, do I keep subscribing? Is that what I'm hearing you? Like, why would you want to not subscribe?
Do I continue to support the reporters who are working for the paper, trying their best to give me information, even though, the higher-ups may or may not be censoring? Or do I cancel my subscription in protest?
What would you do, David?
What would I do? I mean, I know a lot of the journalists, so I mean, I can see. I think about their livelihoods, and I know that a lot of them are working really hard, and that the world is imperfect.
You also saw Kara Swisher's talking about trying to get a group together to buy it from Jeff Bezos. Sorry, Jeff was a classmate of mine in Princeton.
So we have a remote question from one of our satellite locations, and I think we'll see it, and I will read it out. Linda asks, how can people change their use of technology to support freedom, facts, and inspiration? I mean, one idea is to go cold turkey.
That was tried. Do you remember in July of 2023 when a group, they went off for, including some advertisers, for a month, only a month. Look, I think we're getting to the point we should think about getting off these platforms. I would never have said that before, but That's why I began building the Matrix Protocol chat app, right? Because I realized at some point, let me quickly answer that through Rappler's perspective. In 2018, I literally quantified how much it would cost me and Rappler if we were to get off Facebook completely. And it came down to about $2 million a year, $1.8 million. And I still needed it, so I was like, okay, we cannot get off until we find an alternative. So we began to build the alternative. A little news group, we're a medium-sized news group, right? 120 people, should not be building tech. So that's also where I feel like government's abdicated responsibility for protecting us in this. But Linda, to your answer, we're living our way into the answer for this. I want to get to a point where we have a safe place where real people can have real conversations and have a process of democracy. The experiment is in progress.
We have a question here. Paul from Camden.
This is along the lines of what everyone's been talking about. We've seen the Washington Press Corps, for example, not behaving as journalists. They're not asking hard questions. They're not getting us the real facts and publishing those. What can we do to encourage them to do that? I know it would be a threat to their jobs to do it, but how can we encourage them?
You first.
I see them asking the questions, but that trust is so eroded that people aren't hearing the reporting. And I want to get to loop that back around after some more of your questions to the idea of social capital building trust. But are you seeing, from your perspective, looking into the United States, an already cowed press corps not asking the tough questions?
No, not yet. Not yet. So I feel like first understand the context of what we have to work in, and I'm going to throw journalism in there, right? The distribution system for journalism handcuffs journalism, right? Literally, if you lie, you get 6 times faster distribution, and if you incite hate, you get wider distribution. Our journalism doesn't spread as far, number one, but the attacks against journalists do, right? So please take a step back, take a breath, and then kind of demand. You can demand better from news organizations because they do listen. They won't automate it the way poor tech companies, Well, no, not poor. They're very wealthy. The news organizations are looking to find the way forward right now, and I think 2025 will determine whether we live or die. And it is based on trust. And that trust, please understand, we have been under attack from the very beginning. I mean, it's in President Trump's book, isn't it? Right?
What does he say?
He said that, you keep attacking them. Do you remember that quote? What did he say? He said this after the attack. Yeah. See, you would know your country better.
Hi, it's Mark from Belmont, Mass. But I have a question about privacy on the internet. If you travel in Europe, especially in Ireland, there's a privacy assumed. You have to waive it on every website you go onto. Can you comment on how we can improve the internet through use of privacy?
Data privacy doesn't exist anymore. Right? That's the reality that we're living in because again, look at the latest consumer reports. I think this was at the end of last year where they said that each of these tech companies have taken our data and they have cloned us. 2,300 different massive data sets. For news organizations, and you see this playing out in courts now, right? Some of the news organizations, the New York Times among them, have filed cases against the generative AI. We produce the journalism that is expensive, because what makes journalism work is a system of checks and balances. Those checks and balances have been taken away. Sorry, let me go back to your data privacy question. I think this is something we can demand. But would you trust if Facebook tells you that, yeah, we're not touching your data? I mean, I can tell you, and this is documented, right? There was a period of time up until very recently where all the engineers could actually monitor someone they want to date. There was like more than 16,000 of them at one point. Anyway, I can give you that stat. So data privacy is, I think, something. It's part of our human rights, and we should retain it. The country that does this best is Estonia, of all of the ones. And why? Because they've lived under. This is one of the countries that have pulled out of the Soviet Union. But if you're Estonian and the government wants to look at your license, you get a notice that the government will look at your license, right? The data privacy is important. I didn't really answer your question because we struggle with this all the time.
In the balcony.
Hi, my name is Brennan Edwards from Edward Little High School in Auburn, Maine. You talked about online violence, and we saw recently that a representative for Maine, Laura Libby, doxed a minor. How do you think, or do you think the United States or Maine has the ability to change or stop this in the future?
We should explain doxing. What is it?
Doxing is revealing private information, where they
compromise
live
somebody.
or where they're walking, to actually, most of the time it goes with dog whistle, meaning you try to trigger an attack against this person. This happens all the time, for example, with Elon Musk, right? The doxing that happens there. The US government should have already, right? I actually said, remember President Biden's last speech about oligarchy? Should have been his first speech. And then we could have gotten some of our rights back, perhaps. But part of it is, and I'll tell you what the big tech companies will say. They'll say, don't you trust us more than you trust China? I mean, I gotta say, I don't know.
This question on this side of the balcony. Tell us your first name.
Sam Bernardo. I'm a Filipino student at Oceanside High School in Rockland. My question is, did the Philippine government use social media to help drive political polarization intentionally, i.e. propaganda, fear-mongering, smear campaigns, etc.?
Was it coordinated by the government?
Yes, and I can say that categorically because it was in the budget of the this is how you find out, right? It's in the book, but I actually footnoted that. You could see they hired more people than there were people inside the presidential communications office. And then all these people, once they weren't being paid anymore, they were, again, guns for hire. So yes, absolutely.
Up here? Is there someone there?
It's on. Hello, my name is Humpty Muhammad. I'm from Lewiston High School. My question is, what are your thoughts on the press around Israel-Palestine?
Subject of next year's conference at the Camden Conference.
Why don't I tell you about the first month after October 7th on social media? If you go on Rappler and just Google NERV information ecosystem, it was the US information ecosystem that we were looking at. On TikTok, hashtag Free Palestine on TikTok was 97% ahead of hashtag Free Israel, Stand With Israel. Right? That's on the first month. But on Facebook and Instagram, it was only 37, hashtag Free Palestine was only 39% ahead of hashtag Stand With Israel. as you can tell, I'm very focused on the manipulation of that group, right? So who manipulated? Did the American company bring it down, or did the Chinese company bring it up? These are real world problems that have been around for a century. And it is violent, and there is war, and our information ecosystems are manipulating us.
It's a terrific book about propaganda written by a guy named John Maxwell Hamilton about the First World War. And without manipulations by government officials, we might not have entered the war. There were a lot of German Americans that were very ambivalent. It has, to stand behind your statement, it has massive real-world effects. Question over here?
Hi, Jim from Camden. I reflect on the challenge of covering President Trump. He cannot make a public statement without shooting falsehoods all through it. Sometimes the heart of his message is an inaccurate or biased or calculated disinformation statement. And the fact that we say you don't see the reporters asking the tough questions, at some level they'd have to be fact-checking him every sentence to try to get a full honest response, and that's unwieldy. I don't think they do enough of it. But can we acknowledge that this is a unique political figure in a unique power position who simply cannot tell the truth?
I mean, unique. You've seen it before.
Yeah, I have seen it before. Let me first tell you about Duterte, and then David can talk about the President Trump.
Gee, thanks.
You know, I teach at Columbia University, so I have to. Look, under Duterte, what we did was we fact-checked everything. And, you know, this is a president who actually told everybody that he was on fentanyl when he was speaking at the podium, right? So, and he would attack, and fact-checking him is, I think one of the funniest things was, so here's the biggest casualty of truth in the Philippines is the number of people killed in his brutal drug war. You don't have that yet. I hope that doesn't happen, right? But I will say several things that are almost identical. The first was, within 6 months of taking office, President Duterte became the most powerful leader the Philippines had ever had because the checks and balances, our institutions crumbled. It took 6 months. And then the second one was, we did have lies all the time, and he talked all the time, and he was extremely entertaining. And we covered him all the time because he's the president. I still call him President Duterte because he is the president. The office deserves the respect, right? We had another elections, and I think that's largely because the Philippine military did not support term extension, right? But remember, we were the country that had the People Power Revolt in 1986, and that happened when the Philippine military decided to pull away from Marcos and join the people in the streets. There's a lot at stake here today. And let me point out two things that don't get much coverage. The first is FARA, kind of the end of FARA. The second is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was demolished, torn apart. What does that mean? That means you can be corrupt when you're overseas.
This was 2 weeks ago. We covered this. There was a day where where the president asked to temporarily stop enforcement of it.
Temporarily only, or forever?
That's what the statement was.
So to me, that's really important because, you know, one of the things that stops the growth of kleptocracies is that it is against the law for an American company to bribe overseas.
To get back to his question, President Trump or any politician who lies, what does it say about your understanding of the information ecosystem that now works?
Yeah. Bullying now works, right? You say it all the time, because the extremes, that's also partly by design. If 2018 lies spread 6 times faster, so what does that mean? That means your journalists have to work significantly harder. That means your distrust can grow, right? But that's also why I go back, right? How do you retain trust? It begins in communities. It begins with your family and friends. Don't just talk about losing faith or losing hope or losing trust. Do something about it, because it's incredibly important right now. Help your journalists. That's a good one, because we're journalists.
I'm going to come back to that idea, but there's a question here that Volunteer 2 has identified. Tell us your first name.
Thank you. Mark, Concord, Massachusetts. And thank you for this wonderful program. I want to come back to this question of whether we respond to big tech and to a certain degree big media by withdrawing from it or engaging more actively in it. And I want to know your thoughts on whether there is a model for trying to reclaim popular ownership of big tech by being more active and more demanding of it and holding it more accountable. Should we, for example, be more active in posting and reposting to defeat some of the libelous material on these platforms? Do we advocate for repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act so that we can hold these platforms accountable for defamatory material online? Do we ask institutional shareholders to in turn hold management accountable for these public companies for the material that they're putting online and the methodology, the algorithms they're using? Is that a strategy, or is that just wishful thinking on my part?
This one I can keep the answer relatively. Go to power and money. If you can talk to the shareholder, if it's at that level. Otherwise, if you're doing it on the platform, you're making money for the platform and you're wasting your time, right? Because the truth doesn't spread. So we've learned this the hard way. We're free labor, and we're still on Facebook. We still fact check because there are Filipinos on Facebook, but the design works against us. So that's one. The second is, do our representatives listen to us? Will they listen to us? Maybe if you organize, that could be one way to do it. But again, this goes back to the next generation, because growing up, it's the Paris city mayor, Anna Hidalgo, who called Twitter a human sewer, right? X, human sewer. We need the space. Do we build another one? And I'll end with one thing that, actually two things from Paris, the AI summit that just happened. I was part of the first one where you had Yoshua Bengio, who won the Turing Award, Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And we had dinner with President Macron, where you can see that there pushes and pulls. A country wants to get ahead in the technology, but the technology itself is extremely dangerous. Joshua Bengio actually said, AI agents. Has anyone here tried the AI agents? They're just rolling out, be careful. Joshua Bengio and Geoffrey Hinton both said that we should not be rolling out AI agents, meaning that they can code themselves and exist and recode, right? You can tell an AI agent, for example, if it's already functioning, stop climate change. And depending on what it does, it could, and I'm just doing a Black Mirror episode, it could kill all humanity because then it would stop climate change, right? You don't know, it's a probabilistic thing. But both of those scientists said that we should not be rolling out AI agents without safety involved. We should not have rolled out the AI of social media without safety involved, right? We need to learn our lessons in this. I'm not really giving you a concrete answer because we're doing our best to figure out how we live through this moment. And again, I've invested money now to build a public information ecosystem. So the second part that happened was at the French government and other tech companies, we rolled out an NGO that was incubated at Columbia University. We had a Trust and Safety Tools Consortium, right? So I'm going to say this my way and not the official way. My way is that it was like an Alcoholics Anonymous for the trust and safety people working inside the companies, right? We did like convenings, and then we said, you know, it takes too long to wait for governments to create laws. What is the basic basement for safety that everything on the internet should have? What should we be building for it? And how can we work together to do that? So even as I was attacking top-down, we were trying to work, and we came out with 2 papers. I can share them tomorrow. I'll bring them. And then the second one was, each one of these companies, remember X fired 85% of its safety engineers when Elon Musk took over. But the people working there, they're low men on the totem pole, they want the help. So what did they do? They actually came up with a system, and we rolled out, with France's help, Roost, robust open online safety tools, which means that I'm building a tech platform, you're building a tech platform, the safety tools, here, they're free. And it will set a floor for how bad child safety, for example, right? Pornography for kids. Microsoft has the CSAM, it's called, the database, that actually is the best database in the world. And Microsoft is willing to give it to everyone, but they only had one person working on it. Now,
One person.
but now Roost will have it, and it'll be open to everyone. So there's small things that we're doing, bottom up. But you wouldn't have heard about it, would you?
We have a remote question. Let's see what this one is all about. And I'm mindful of the time of night here. This is from David of Friendship, Maine. How do we get our corporate leaders to stand with democracy? How do you get corporate leaders? You've actually been in the trenches on this very issue. You have gone to a big media platform and said, you're breaking our democracy. And the answer at that point was, de facto answer seemed to be from your book, we're making money. We don't care.
That's the answer, right? So it depends. Depends on which corporate leaders you're talking about, David. I will say in the Philippines, let me put it in my country so it doesn't hurt as much in this one. In the Philippines, again, corporate leaders under the time of Duterte ducked. And I would say that even our COVID, right, the only way that we dealt with COVID at that point, we had one of the longest lockdowns in the world because we had a dictator, essentially. And he pushed the private companies to be the ones to buy the vaccines, right? There were some there. So what happened? The corporate leaders ducked, but ultimately they paid a price for it. And at some point, they began to demand better. Businesses have to stand up, right? Because, and I appeal to enlightened self-interest. Enlightened self-interest. This was an ASEAN term, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Do you want your kids to grow up in a fascist world? Or maybe you're going to Mars or underground in New Zealand, right? I mean, there's also that. But, I mean, look, power and money does not have to be at the expense of societies.
There's a question up in the balcony.
Thank you. Okay.
Tell us your first name.
I'm Nathan. I'm a journalism student at the University of Maine. My question is, what advice do you have for the next generation of journalists, those of us who are starting our careers directly into this hostile ecosystem?
We need you. We do, because I will say, look, Rappler, our median age is 23 years old. And at the worst of times, it was a combination of our experience in dealing with crisis, with just that incredible energy and the ability to never sleep of the youth. You know, the idealism is there, don't let it. I mean, look, you have something different that we didn't have because you're not getting coffee for a producer. You literally can already do journalism, but it is going to be hard, and it doesn't pay much, and more people are getting laid off. So begin thinking about how you can, this is a far more fragmented world. The advice I would give is stay the track, begin to build your community. It starts with that, and it goes hand in hand. And too often, we journalists don't think enough about the community we serve. And I think that's a secret, right? Like, that's a secret to success.
I would say that there is a pretty big market for fact-based storytelling. If you know how to tell a story, which is how humans absorb information, and you understand what is truth, what is based on best possible research, there are many more outlets now than there were when I started out, when it was broadcast only. People want, there's podcasts, and I think that there's opportunity for this. But I wanted to get you back to that amazing mesh, because not in the fight for a partisan fight for one party or another, but in the interests of what actually happened or what didn't happen, those kind of facts. If you just forward, what did you say, with enthusiasm or passion? What works without anger?
Inspiration.
Inspiration. And you do it with emotion. If it's some person you've never met and have no relationship with, they're not going to believe you. Why would they believe you? I don't think they would believe you. But if you have even a casual relationship with them and some way of having dialogue with them, they might say, well, that woman's pretty nice. Seems reasonable when we met that time. Maybe they might take on the information that your fact check is conveying. And I don't know if anyone's here seen that great movie, Join or Die, about social capital, meaning you live longer if you join groups like the Camden Conference. And the idea is people of disparate backgrounds who won't agree on national politics have to connect to each other in a community group like the Kiwanis or a bowling league.
Putnam.
That's exactly what that film was about.
Yeah.
And then maybe the mesh would work better when you say, what you're reading ain't true, and here are the sources. But you can't, can you start from scratch? We have no relationship with somebody?
So I think, first, you're absolutely correct, right? We don't know each other, but doing something together begins to build a community. But here's the other part that happens online, and it's the social network analysis. He is a boundary spanner to your network. I'm a boundary spanner to you, to the Philippines, right? And because we're boundary spanners, if we actually decided to, here's an idea, I can spread it deliberately to my network in the Philippines. So there is something, the reason why we did it this way is because technology is fast, and in order to just stay in the same place, you have to work 4 or 5 times harder, right? So there is that in terms of the virtual world. But social network analysis is all about boundary spanners. And every one of us here is a boundary spanner to another community. The information cascade is what you're looking at. And that becomes stronger when you form a community of trust. I gotta tell you, this is how we survived the Duterte years. They were 6 years of hell, and now we're in purgatory.
But is the community of trust virtual? Because that's the paradox of everything we're talking about, which is, do you use these platforms that you think can be toxic, but do we have other ways of relating that avoid them?
It's both. But in order to actually, so look, if you get offline, you lose a chunk of life, right? Which is part of the reason that we can argue both to governments and to the tech companies that there should only be one law that governs the physical world and the virtual world, because there's only one person that lives in both, right? Why should there be a different law online versus the physical world? You're not allowed to yell fire in a theater, or, these things aren't allowed, but yet impunity reigns online. Having said that, again, I go back. relationships of trust are where it all begins. I don't think, if I was still managing the largest network in the Philippines, which is the network that lost its license, its franchise to operate, it was so political as a manager that I don't know if I would have been able to do what I did with my 4 co-founders and a team of 120 people, because we trusted each other, right? I was really scared at one point, and you know what my co-founders did? I told them, I'm a little bit scared. So they said that, well, look, if you go to jail, I'll bring you sheets, I'll bring you food, I'll bring you a fan. I was like, okay, thanks, guys. But this is also, but the one thing that we did do that set it apart, again, it goes back to trust. Only one of the 4 co-founders could be afraid at a time. So we had to pass the fear.
No one suggested they could bring you a carpenter's file or something? All right, this gathering is run by hardy New Englanders, as you know, and that means no rest for the weary, no sleeping in on a Saturday morning. We'll be rocking and rolling right here and in the remote venues and on your screens, starting at the stroke of 9 o'clock tomorrow. Don't forget your badges. Bring them. Don't leave them in the car because you can't get in. You need the badge to get back in. What do we do with our badges? We don't forget them. Tomorrow, 2 great sessions in the morning, 2 great sessions in the afternoon. It is a rich meal. Our speakers will be exploring the origins and evolution of democracy, drivers of what can be anti-democratic trends, including in some cases populism, religious nationalism, and the rise of tech-driven communications platforms of the sort we've been discussing. Plus, we'll explore modern-day dictatorships on both the political right and the political left. Sleep well if you can. See you in the morning. Thank you.